everyone, welcome to another Conversation Over Drinks. I'm Coach Wolverine.
Coach Kelowna.
And today we're going to talk to you guys about why nice guys actually finish last and the reason behind that. Do you have any idea as to where I'm going with this topic?
Briefly, I think in regards to like boundaries and things like that, obviously I kind of know where we're going, but you've spent some time this last week learning about the topic, so I'm excited to hear it and maybe not be so nice by the end of it.
So what do you feel is the difference between being nice and being kind?
Being kind is like, we talked about it before, right? So you're being kind, you're being genuine to those around you, and you try and add value to those around you, in my opinion. Being nice often leaves you way lower than you need to be as far as prioritization goes. It's putting yourself second, putting important things last.
Okay.
So that you feel like you're doing something for someone else.
Okay. So when we're nice, right, I'll be the first to admit I've been guilty for this in the past as well, but when we're nice, that niceness is most often rooted in a people-pleasing mentality, which thus then leads us to it being emotional manipulation because we are doing something nice for said individual in hopes that we're going to be reciprocated in some way, basically having our feelings validated.
Making it transactionary, right?
Exactly. So you're doing something nice, and yes, it might be something nice, but you're hoping for something in return. Whereas when we do something that is kind, it doesn't matter.
There's no expectation.
There's no expectation that's attached to it. And so now reverting this back to the why nice guys finish last, right? So like in the relationship dynamic, when a guy is overly nice, it's essentially creating this lost puppy dog effect, right? Where we find ourselves chasing for emotional validation through needs that weren't met either through parenting in the past or through friendships in the past, or even then not being able to validate our own feelings right now. So it's an external, we're trying to reach for it externally to feed our own emotional needs. And so at its roots, it is emotional manipulation.
Absolutely. So we're just getting real heavy immediately. I mean, like, so for someone who, like, I would consider myself, my emotional range not to be very high. It takes me time to unpack, like, feelings, etc. Like the big ones, obviously, like when you're frustrated, you get angry. When you're sad, when you're whatever. But like differentiating between the micro emotions or smaller reasons takes me a little bit of time. Obviously, we're working on that, but
what does this feel?
Yeah, I get it, right? So that's my side of it too, right? Like if you never get to the point where you realize that you're just being nice to get a certain type of reaction, rather than adding value to those around you, then you don't get the benefits of being kind, which we've discussed, right? Like being kind, charity, all those things. Like there's a genuine psychological and personal self-fulfillment that comes from that, but it comes from it because it is charitable and because it is giving and because it is adding value, right?
It's the difference of doing something because you want to versus doing something out of resentment.
Yeah.
And it can be said too that even like there's times where I know that I was nice purely because I felt like I had to be nice. So there was hidden resentment underneath that. I might have been really good at masking it at the time, but it was there. And then so I'm putting out that energy. And other people, especially in the relation dynamic, women pick up on that stuff very, very easily. And so basically, like when I had this epiphany this week and started diving into this, there's a lot of aspects of my past that made sense because I will be the first to admit that I was not capable of being able to validate my own feelings. And so I would be that nice guy and then thus have the tag of like, oh, you're like a brother to me. You're like the best friend. You're like all that stuff all my life. And I hated it and I never understood why. But then when I connected these dots, I'm like, oh.
We've actually talked about this.
Because I was the nice guy, because I was looking to these women to validate my feelings and validate me as a person when I didn't know how to do that myself. And then that was when the reality hit. I'm like, man, like emotionally manipulating them. Not intentionally, but it's because it's the difference between persuasion and manipulation, right? I was the one that would have been getting the benefit out of it if they followed suit.
Right, and that's just we want to look at that too. Like being nice, like it's not a manipulation with malicious intent by any means, right?
No.
Like, but again, being nice for a certain are you actually being nice? Like, are you, you know?
Yeah.
If it's like it has to be genuine, and then that genuine expression of being nice is then where we start transitioning into kind, in my opinion, right? Very similar. Like if you look at the words themselves, great, but they're not the same at all.
No.
And you're actually shortchanging yourself. I think that's what we need to understand is like we're shortchanging ourself by having these expectations, by trying to reach for that external validation, by having that transactionary mentality.
Yep.
And in the end, we either end up with resentment because we didn't get the result we wanted, or we have ill will towards someone else, or it's like you get mad. But like, I know one thing that I've always fell back on is when you get mad or frustrated, it's because you don't understand. So it's not that you don't understand their response, it's you don't understand why you had to get that response in the first place. And we're just missing that step. And that's...
Well, it's also being left, basically, our subconscious or our ego was seeking validation. We didn't receive it, even so. Like we're being subconsciously driven. We don't know what we're doing intentionally. So then, when we don't get that feeling that we were chasing, we're also left with that misunderstanding of like, well, why am I still feeling like this? Like I did something nice, but why am I still feeling like garbage after the fact? And it's because we weren't doing it from a genuine place.
And I know, like in a micro sense, having conversations with people, like I've had people apologize if they haven't responded for a few hours. And like my response is literally always like, hey, I never expect a reply from someone unless it's like super important, obviously. But if you don't expect a reply ever and you're having a natural...
that important, they can call.
Yeah, and if it is like that big a deal, like if I needed to talk to you right now, you would get more than one message and then whatever.
Yeah.
So, but I don't think that's a neutral response for a lot of people, right? Like it becomes like, well, why aren't they talking to me? Why aren't they responding? But it's not. It's like, okay, cool, like whatever.
But the world right now is in a state of starvation for validation, right? It's like, so how many times have you had a conversation with somebody and you're telling them a story or whatever, and all of a sudden they're like, oh, well, yeah, but, and then completely reverse it around to themselves? More often than not, when you actually dissect and actually analyze your past conversations, the vast majority of them, it's always about me. And we do this unintentionally. It's because we're not feeling validated, so we're hoping that we're going to seek validation from this stranger or our friend or a parent or anything like that, as opposed to responding first. I was like, wow, that's really interesting. I had an experience similar to that too. Can I share it with you?
And that's what I was about to ask. So for some of us, and I've definitely been guilty of this for a large period of time, working on it currently, but it's like when you hear something and then you go to share a commonality, it's trying to find like a connection via common ground. It's that middle piece that you just stated, do you mind if I share a similar experience to see if we can discuss, that bridges the gap between, oh, I just want to talk about me, and oh, I want to share something with you so that we can move this conversation forward in a productive or functional way.
Yeah. That middle part there is key though, with figuring out where the conversation was, where the intention of that conversation was, right? So if say you have a significant other that comes to you with a problem, and as men, what do we want to do? We want to solve it and fix it. So we all of a sudden just give them the answer, when sometimes they might have just wanted to vent, right? And so that middle piece there is like, is this something that you're wanting to just vent about, or is this something that you want to problem solve on, or however you want to frame that connecting piece? But you know, for men, because we want to be the provider, we want to be the problem solver, we automatically interject ourselves to solve said problem, to put ourselves on that pedestal of, not necessarily a pedestal above, just a pedestal adjacent of being able to solve that problem for anybody.
And I think we hyper like consider that too. It's like, hey, if we solve this problem, it's gone. Which is not the reality of it, right? Like even if we give a solution to a problem, this problem is still there. And that's one thing, like, hey, we can give all the solutions we want. But if we're, same with any of our clients, anyone that we give a solution or like a method or whatever to, if they're not ready to hear it or they're not ready to do it, then it falls on deaf ears anyway. So as much as we're trying to add value, it is valuable, it's just not valuable right now. And I think that's the biggest thing we need to check. Like, hey, is it the time for me to solve this problem, or do we need more? Like, what do they need in regards to that? And that's where the kindness comes in, right?
Yep, absolutely. And it's also asking ourselves, like, do we actually know the solution to this problem, or are we just trying to interject ourselves because we have that people-pleasing mentality and we're wanting to feel or be looked at as important?
With the solution. And that is the difference too, right? It's like, hey, I have an idea that may help versus go do this. Right, and then it's the same as coaching, same as sales, which we've both been in forever, right? If it's your idea, it's a lot less valuable than if we make it think like it's their idea, without using better terminology. Ultimately, you want them to reach the end goal, which is like your goal.
That's coaching, right? It's asking questions to lead your clients or lead whomever it is to, you know, even if you're coaching a family member or a friend or whatever, to lead them to their aha. It's asking questions and leading in that way. But
it's not going to get done unless it's theirs, and that's what we need to realize. As much as we want to help, there's obviously our circle of buddies where it's like, hey, just do this, like quit being a meathead, which is fine. But that's a relationship that's been built, right? There's different levels of this communication that needs to be taken. I know there's buddies that I have that will just rip on each other all day, but if we were ever in trouble, right? So those types of things that can be taken into account, but especially new relationships, which are harder and harder to build the more we get caught up in the digital thing, without getting too deep into that. But we have a lot of surface relationships with people. We also have a lot of fake surface relationships that we think we do because we've had conversations with them via typing, not real. So those things, we need to learn how to have these communications, especially early on when we're sharing stories. And I think that's huge for you to bring that up and just like answer my question before it was there. But no, it's perfect.
Yeah, it was just a very interesting aha moment, how all of this stuff kind of just like piles on top of each other of, being a people pleaser, and then how that's rooted in wanting to fix problems, and then placing yourself in that spotlight in hopes of getting that validation to feed something that's missing inside of us. That's actually it.
And I do think, harking back to some of our older episodes and stuff, like if you're going to be nice by like not saying something, omitting a truth or graying the whatever because you're like, oh, this will make them sad, stop that. There's very few times where a white lie or something like that is actually going to come out with the better result. Immediately, maybe.
Yeah, but then once that white lie comes to surface, it will be way worse than if it was just confronted right off the bat.
Exactly. So that's like, when we say being nice, it can get you in a lot of trouble. Whereas being kind, being honest, being those things, it may hinder, like if something happens that's bad, essentially, especially in relationships, right? But being kind, being honest, and not omitting things is your easiest way to work past something. If you're trying to be nice and never make someone sad, you cannot go through a relationship of any kind, whether it's friends, significant others, whatever, without someone ever not liking something you do. And that's something you need to be comfortable with. No one is ever going to like everything you say or do, period. And if you're not comfortable with someone being a little upset at you, you've got some stuff to think about. That's so much more.
Other conversation.
100%. Which, good thing we're doing more episodes. But, this is a big topic, and like I said, you got heavy right away, and it's great.